Hi, everyone.
Ooh.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Aleph Academy. For those who don't know me, my name is Mia, and I'm the studio manager for Aleph Australia and your facilitator today. We'll give folks a little more time to join, and in the meantime, we'll get to know our speaker, Sean Smith, a little better. Hi, Sean, how are you today?
Hi, Mia, good. How are you?
Not too bad. We're going to ask you a few questions. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so first question, how do you describe what you do to family and friends?
That's a good question. It depends on the family members. Older family members, it's just like, I can fix the computer, don't worry, just tell me what's wrong. For most of the younger family and friends, I talk a little bit about the fact that we design things and we help make things. And we mostly do that for banks and large enterprises. And then when they're like, what does that mean? And they go, well, you know, the mobile app that you have to do your banking with, chances are somebody in our team worked on that or delivered that for a lot of banks around the world, which is probably the easiest way to exemplify it.
Okay, now a bit of fast trivia. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Pancakes or waffles?
Pancakes, definitely pancakes.
See, I like the little holes that hold the syrup for you, you know?
I don't hate waffles, it's just I can make pancakes easily. So I don't have a waffle maker at home, so I tend to have pancakes a lot more.
Comedy or horror?
Oh, both comedy, horror, but I probably watch comedy more than horror.
I have heard that horror is nothing more than comedy without the punchline. So,
yeah.
And finally, sorry about that.
No, I was going to say I quite like horror as well. But.
And finally, are you more productive in the morning or the evening?
Oh, it depends on the day and it depends on the task, but both. I'm a bit of a night owl, but I'm also an early riser. So that's a hard one. It depends on the day. Some days I wake up really early and I'm like straight at it working. Some days I want to take my time but I'll stay up late working. So yeah, I don't know, maybe it's something to do with circadian rhythms or something like that. I don't know, but both.
Well, thanks for that, Sean. Everyone, today Sean will be teaching us about storytelling and how it can support your craft. We'll also be hearing from some panelists who'll be partaking in a small activity, introducing themselves and presenting this briefly at the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Sean now, who will start off our presentation.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. And I'm just going to get a little bit organized. I've got a slide missing. So I'll do a quick little intro to myself. So I'm Sean, as me is introduced. I'm actually an artist and a photographer first, and I'm also a filmmaker. So we're going to talk a little bit about film-related storytelling because I think it's relevant to me and it's something that I think is relatable to most people. And I help run the Aleph business in Australia. So work in a digital and design-centric agency as well during the day. So I wanted to start off by just talking a little bit about something that we have as a tradition when we have events and presentations in Australia, which is we do what we call a welcome to country or an acknowledgement of country. And it goes a little bit like this. I'm going to do it for you, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I ask that before starting today that we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And so for those of you who aren't in Australia or you're not familiar with that, it's actually something that's got quite a rich history, and it's something that I encourage people to look into and to try and do more and more of. And it's a nice segue into what we're going to talk about today. And what I mean by that is this is paying respect to the people that were on this land before us. And the people that were on this land before us are actually one of the oldest communities of humans that have continued to exist anywhere on the planet. And they've got a really rich history of storytelling. So when you go to school in Australia, we actually learn about something called the dream time, which was a method of passing on history and culture and tradition through telling stories, and some really great Dreamtime stories that we all learn here in Australia. I'm not going to tell you any of those, but I did want to just highlight that storytelling is very old, and it's actually been with us for a very long time. So what I'm going to talk about today is not necessarily new things. In some cases, it might be things that draw on your childhood. And I think that there's a really nice connection to the kinds of stories that we all know and are familiar with and grew up with, and what we do day to day. And often there's a bit of a divide between what we have in our mind and what we have to do with work, when we're thinking this is very different from how I would tell a story to children, for example. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. So hopefully it's a little bit of fun, a little bit educational. We have got a panelist scenario, and we'll introduce you to those people a little bit later, and we'll get them to hopefully tell a fun story as well. So I want to start by saying that we all know good stories, probably lots of them. And, if you think about Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet and Macbeth and some of these great Shakespearean fables, you think about, Little Red Riding Hood. And I think for the most part, most of you would be able to retell a handful of those stories that you learnt when you were a child pretty easily. And there's actually some really interesting work that's been done at analyzing why that is. And so what makes a great story, and why do those stories stick with us? And so I want to talk a little bit about that today. And we try to break things down into kind of practical, repeatable steps in our design practice. And, I want to try and use that approach to analyzing storytelling, and then also give you some kind of design thinking style methodology that you can apply to telling your own stories, and whatever it may be that you tell those stories for. So there's actually a nice connection here as well. So when the team and I were talking about this presentation and the art of storytelling, we realized we'd actually had two previous sessions that had a nice tie-in as well. And they might not have so pointedly focused on storytelling, but when Avis presented on designing headspace and journaling, when I think of journaling, and for my own personal journal, a lot of that is actually storytelling. And sometimes it's waffly and long-winded, and sometimes it's poignant and punchy. But often it's my way of expressing myself through a story. And I think there's a nice connection with the journaling aspect. And we talk about personal brand as well. And so Mia presented on personal brand and how to do that with Jasneet. And I think that writing is one of those areas where you can really express yourself, and not just writing, but how you tell a story and how people know you, and the way that you tell stories. And a simple and fun thought experiment I thought I'd give you here is, if you think about someone like Stephen King, or J.K. Rowling, who have got these really huge, bodies of work which are synonymous with their name. So you think Stephen King, you think, ooh, scary. So imagine next time you're writing something simple like your journal. Imagine if you were writing it, but you were writing it like Stephen King, and you're applying Stephen King's personal brand. Would that change the tone? Would it change the words that you use? Would it change the feeling that was imparted by that personal brand? So it's not a direct connection, obviously. It's not like fashion, but I think there is definitely an element of synergy between these themes. So when I talked about analyzing story, I like to think about story in the same way that I think about most things, which is food. And so I quite like food, and I quite like cooking, and like hopefully some of you, I quite like a show called MasterChef. And if you've watched MasterChef, they have this really cool concept, which is called the mystery box. And the mystery box focuses on a common set of ingredients, and those ingredients are then given to participants, and those participants are then asked to make something with those ingredients. And I like that, because then if I think about storytelling, I go, oh, okay, we know a lot of these great stories. And what makes them great, I think we can digest into simple bite-sized chunks of commonality, which we could say are ingredients. There are key ingredients in good stories. And, in cooking, we might say it's, when something's salty or sweet or sour, and, and balancing those things. And in story, we have those similar ingredients. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about those ingredients. I'm going to introduce them to you. And then, like all good recipes, you can't just have ingredients. You also need to have a method. Now, in the show, they have their own methods, which they apply. That's part of the challenge. But here I'm actually going to give you the method as well. So you could say that this Academy session is almost like a recipe in a way. Hopefully that cooking reference is not lost on all of you. I hope you all do spend a little bit of time in the kitchen. So the ingredients are people. All good stories, we want to relate to them. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Wally is a really great example, but it's a character at the end of the day. Their purpose, so their motivation, what's driving them and what they're trying to achieve. Without that, it's very hard for audience members to align with what's happening in a story. Like, we don't know who the people are or who the characters are, and then what they're trying to do, or what this story is about, like what's driving it, propelling it forward. We need to appeal to the audience's head. So there needs to be logical things there, and there needs to be, some connection, but we also need to kind of keep it simple. We don't want to confuse them as well. And depending on the genre of the story and the application, there's different degrees of simplicity and complexity that we can play with. But we also want to, really importantly, appeal to their heart. So the best stories are not the ones that we are able to kind of rattle off all the intricate detail, but they're the ones that have moved us in a way. So, they're pulling at the heartstrings. There's really great, romances and tragedies, and those examples where we're emotionally moved and we have that emotional resonance tend to be the ones that we can remember. Like, I remember reading great books and kind of closing the last page and having tears in my eyes, and I'll remember how those stories made me feel, even if I couldn't tell you exactly what the characters' names were, or potential plot points, but the feeling stays with you for a long time. And if you apply that, if you think about that, that can be quite powerful in trying to convey what your story is about. And the last thing is drama. And sometimes we talk about drama as conflict, and I mean, these are the things that keep us interested. And if you think about most stories, you want to have a bit of a point to them, and you want that point to be something that's engaging, so people remember the story, but they're also like, there's it's not just we went from point A to point B and that's the end of the story. It's like, and then what happens? We want to know a little bit more, and we want that drama. So keep those ingredients in mind. I'm going to talk a little bit about this mystery box challenge, because I thought it might be fun to play a bit of a game with our panelists. Now, normally, for context, I would do this type of activity in person, and we'd break people out into working groups, and we'd go away and create some stories, come back and take turns of laughing at each other whilst we present them in workshops. We're going to try and do it over this format of Zoom, and for those of you streaming at home, hopefully it carries over. It is going to put a little bit of pressure on my fellow panelists, but the idea is I'm going to take you through these mystery box ingredients, and you'll notice there's a couple of blank spots, because that's where the storytellers have an opportunity to add their own appeals of simplicity and head and emotion and heart. So the ingredients can be interchanged, and I'm just going to show them now. So I'll reveal them all, and then we'll go through them. At this point, I think we might introduce quickly our panelists. So I'm going to throw to you, Mia, if we want to do that.
Not a problem, Sean. So we've got a couple of panelists here tonight. So we'll start with Panduka. Panduka is one of our panelists. Sorry, excuse me. One of our panelists this evening. We also have Laetitia and Farid and Antares and Murray and Chris. All here. If everyone would like to just say a short word about themselves, we'll start with Chris, because I can see.
I really hope that my background's not inverted now. Hi guys, I'm Chris. I'm actually from Singapore, but I work in the Philippines office now. I'm a UX designer, and I also used to write a lot when I was at school. I actually started writing when I was like 10. I discovered a short story by Ray Bradbury in one of the school books. It was just amazing. It's something that changed my life, literally and figuratively. So I'm actually excited to see what's going to come out of this. And I see those mystery boxes here, and oh my God, I'm so thrilled and scared a little bit. Thanks for having me here, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, Chris. Panduka, would you like to say a few things about yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Myself, Panduka, and I'm from Singapore. I'm one of the mobile application engineers of Aleph. Public speaking is one of my interests, but I feel storytelling is another scope of it. So I'm still confused what we are going to do here, looking at this mystery box. I'm certain that it's going to be an interesting session. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Panduka. Laetitia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Laetitia. I'm one of the experience designers in Australia at Aleph Australia. I have been told that I can write without really having that as a purpose, but I prefer to tell stories with photography. So yeah, I'm quite excited about this mystery box. I wish I had had more wine before joining the panel for more inspiration, but let's go for it. Thanks, Sean and Mia.
No problem. Thank you.
Farid, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Farid Aiman. So I'm from Malaysia, and I'm working as a front-end developer at Aleph. That's all I think. Okay.
Okay. Who is left? Antares, would you like to say hello?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Antares from Indonesia. I work as an Android developer now, and storytelling is always intrigued me because in the past in junior high school, I used to write these 4-panel comics for my school. So I'm actually excited for this. I think that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And last but not least, I believe we have Mo.
Hi everyone, this is Mo, one of the user experience designers in Australia. Yeah, I'm actually really excited to see what Sean has got to offer. I always trust Sean, but I'm a very visual person, and as you guys know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But with that being said, I'm really excited to see what this session is about. And yeah, go Sean.
Thank you, Mo. Is that everyone, Mia?
I believe so, yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll give you a quick walkthrough of how this works for the panelists, and then we'll get on our way. So you can see a mixture of ingredients there. So for the people column, we have a baby genius, a talking mouse, or a Ninja Turtle. And for the purpose, they wants to be famous, wants to be a president, wants to find love. And for drama, so an element of conflict in your story, a meteor is coming, COVID-19, and climate change. I didn't stretch that too far. So the aim for you is to, as we're going through the rest of the presentation, to be working, squirreling away in the background to craft a story, and it can be completely interchangeable. So for example, a baby genius could decide they want to be president, and they have to do it before the meteor lands. And you have to translate that into a kind of an interesting and engaging story. But at the same time, the premise of this is obviously to have a bit of fun, and they're very silly. So don't worry if it's not too serious or too brilliant. So thank you for joining. I'm going to unpack each of these ingredients in a little bit more detail for you, just to sort of talk about their relevance day to day. And then I'm going to go through the method. And then once I've gone through the method, I'll talk a little bit about applying it for different crafts and in different contexts. But everything what I'm saying today is designed to be kind of like a playbook, but not a rule book. So these are things that can help you along the way, and they can kind of help complement what you might already be doing, or help you maybe acknowledge things that you might already be doing and not necessarily be aware of. And just, with the vein of, in the vein of trying to help improve storytelling for you in whichever way. And I think Chris mentioned he likes short stories and writing, and it can be in that format, or it could be in how you speak to your team in work meetings and presentations and those kinds of things. So there are definitely different applications where these skills can play a role. So I'm going to talk you through, and hopefully we can find some things that stick for you. And I've kept it simple enough that it's digestible. So the first one is people, and so I talked a little bit about characters, and there's a couple of things to note when you craft a story and you put people at the center of it. And one of the good story elements to include is about relevance and relatability. So if you tell stories with good characters and they're irrelevant, or it's hard for your audience to relate to them, they can be interesting, but they definitely don't have that same resonance with the audience. And a really great example of that is the story framework, or the common trope of the reluctant hero. Sometimes we also talk about the underdog. And there's a real natural affinity that audiences have when you're watching films or you're reading stories where there's an underdog, or as your central protagonist, your main character, your hero even, because we can relate to that. Humans are flawed, and we have weaknesses. We're not impervious to bullets, unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course. And part of that, that believability and that vulnerability makes it so the characters in a lot of those great stories are relatable, and that being relatable helps us to feel their plight. And when we go on journeys with them and they're encountering obstacles and conflict, we worry. There's times you asked me about horror earlier. There's definitely times when we're watching horrors and you get the classic jump scare, and that's effective because it's you're immersed in the story and you're going on the journey. But there's some good filmmaking techniques there. But the real horror, the really good horror, the really great scary stories are the ones where you're really relating to the characters. And a really great example of that for me is The Exorcist, which doesn't have a lot of jump scares, but it's very haunting and it's very chilling. And you really relate to the family that's affected by this, the poltergeist, the possession that happens in that film and in that book. So when you're writing a story or you're telling a story, think about the people that it affects that are in the story, whether they're protagonists, whether they're antagonists. So someone who cut you off on the freeway, that might be the antagonist of your story. You might not have that many details about them, but you probably have a lot of colorful language. But this is where you can help bring your audience into the universe that you're creating with the story. And if you think about relatability and you think about relevance, it will help to make it so that the story is more effective and can be a better story. Now, those people, if we're following them through a narrative arc, now whether it's a long story or a short story or a presentation, sometimes it's great to understand what drives them. So their purpose, why do we care about them? What are they motivated by? And another thing to describe it is stakes. So what's at stake for these people? So if we know what they're trying to do and we understand what happens if they achieve it or if they don't achieve it, then we're invested. So if you think, and I love to use the example of The Lord of the Rings. I think The Lord of the Rings is, almost, ticking all the boxes in terms of following good narrative arcs. It's a reluctant hero's journey, and it has an underdog protagonist, and they are very, very clear in their motivation in that they are saving their world. So when Frodo reluctantly takes on the journey of joining the Fellowship and going on his path to destroy the ring, he understands that the reason why he's doing it, even though he doesn't want to do it, and it's going to be very scary and very arduous, is because if he doesn't, then Middle Earth is at risk, and all the people that he loves, potentially going to be taken over by Saruman or whoever the bad guy is in that. I haven't watched it for a long time or read the books, but the motivation there is so easy. It's to save the world and to save all the people that they love. I mean, some stories it's not as clear about as that. It's not, we're not, creating a story around someone who we're working to design something for with this mindset of, oh, we have to save the world. Sometimes it's not as extreme as that. But motivation and purpose can be really, really great ways of keeping the story relevant, keeping the story engaging, and particularly when those purpose points are aligned to the people that the story is about. So if you think about user stories, and those of you who are familiar with that in their craft, user stories, often will follow a very similar format to that, and you might start to see some of this as we go through the presentation, permeating through. Now, the head This is a complex one to, put into a small slide. Now, in the simplest version, I would say keep things simple. So, good stories are easy to learn, they're hard to forget, and they're so simple that you can retell them. So I could very quickly, very easily retell Romeo and Juliet for you. And being able to have that level of simplicity in your story has a lot of utility in real practice. So one, it means that your story stands up as being cohesive and something that's really easy for people to understand. That's a great acid test when you're writing, particularly if you're writing long and complex things. But it also has some utility when you're talking about the story to people. So even if you're not telling the full story, if you want to bring people on the journey, or at least entice them into either reading the story or hearing what you have to say, then being able to digest it into something very small and very simple is actually quite relevant. Now that's the sort of simplest version, is keep it simple, keep it short if you can, and focus on the key elements that are going to get your audience engaged. Now, the more complicated version is once you start getting into the details of things, how can you appeal to the head? So, and what I mean by that is when you're writing, are you writing with, good detail, good accuracy? Are you thinking about how to make it so your story is plausible? And, if you think about the Arnold Schwarzenegger example, some of his early films, they didn't have a lot of realism in them. So they didn't really appeal to the head. So they don't stand out as classics. Whereas, you think about other, great films and, great stories that we all know, and more recent ones where, the writers have gone into great detail and great depth. A perfect example for that for me in cinema is Interstellar, where, there's so much, detail in the original screenplay and then in the finished film around astrophysics. And, they've consulted with, people who were legitimately looking at interstellar travel. And it means that the story stands up. You can watch that film again and again, and whether you like it or not, it's very hard to argue that it's not well done. And so I think that there's a lot of element there. So keeping it simple, but also when you are detailed, know the details and put the effort into really trying to engage your audience at that cerebral level. The heart is also hard. So simple version, try to form an emotional connection. So is there a way that if your story, even if it's not a love story, even if it's not overly dramatic, is there a way that you can find that little bit of emotional resonance for your audience? How do you get them to care? How do you get them to feel something? And, when I'm talking to my film students about their films, and, a lot of them have the intention of going into film festivals. And, part of the festival circuit is to, win awards and get accolades and be recognized as a talented filmmaker. And one of the things I suggest to them is try to move your audience, and whether it's to be provocative and, or scare them, doesn't matter, but find a way to really engage them. And particularly when you're working with the short story format, is there a way that you can write the story in such a clever way that the audience can't help but feel somewhat emotionally engaged, somewhat emotionally moved? And this kind of ingredient, if you will, is also going to be an outcome of the people and their purpose. So if you're doing those things well, then you can engage the heart quite easily as well. So it's not something I can tell you how to do, but it's a consideration that you should definitely be working on. So when you are writing, and coming back to those of you who do user stories and design practice, a big part of what we're doing in that practice is actually building empathy for the people that we're creating things for. So we're trying to tell a story about someone somewhere that's going to use something that we're building, but we're trying to do it in a way that we actually care about that person. And we care about the outcomes of our work, and we care about their experience when they're using the things that we build and the things that we design. So heart is actually more interwoven to daily life and the stories that we use than you might realize. And I think it's an important one. It's also my favorite one, and because I find it the most challenging personally. The last one is usually the one that we all run toward, is drama. So good stories have conflict, and they have challenges. They have sometimes what we call obstacles, things for our characters to overcome. So the people in our story, let's take Frodo, for example, they can't achieve their purpose too easily because nobody wants to watch that. Nobody wants to read that. Nobody cares about the story. Tolkien would not have been a well-known writer if The Lord of the Rings was about a hobbit who got given a ring to destroy and then realized that there was those flying dragon things and just hopped one of those like an Uber to, wherever the ring needed to be destroyed, and it was, job's done before second breakfast. So if that was the story, then we wouldn't watch three-hour films and, all the people who've read the books, and then they wouldn't make another 3 films and the prequel of The Hobbit or the plays. And it just would be boring because it's too easy. So, good stories, really stories that last, they've got drama. And if you think about the people, so the underdogs, the relatable characters, those people that we want to rally behind, and we then understand what they're trying to achieve, and they've got really clear purpose, and we're engaged emotionally and mentally, and then they're met with obstacles and challenges, we root for them and we want them to overcome them. How many times have you watched a film and as it's building up to the climax, you realize that you're almost sitting on the edge of your seat because you're actually quite engaged in the outcomes of the story. It's make-believe. A lot of the stories that we read and a lot of the stories that we retell, they're not real, but we believe in them and they resonate with us. And the things that keep us going back, the entertainment factor, comes from the drama. It comes from that conflict. And I don't like to talk too much about it when I'm talking about film with film students, but the popularity of reality TV shows, and I won't name any because I don't know, I'm sure you all know several of them, is a perfect demonstration that we all love drama. We're engineered around the idea of drama. So campfire drama, water cooler drama, talking about The Bachelor or whatever the relevant reality drama is at the time. But good producers of those shows, they know that, and you will see there is a lot of drama interwoven into their story arcs, and they're actually quite talented in how they do it. So there's the ingredients. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought, some things to, no pun intended, some things to think about when you are crafting a story. And, it's almost like a little bit of a checklist. You can kind of go, who are the people in this story? What's their purpose and what are they trying to achieve? Am I keeping things simple, and appealing to the head? Is there an emotional connection here that I can make? Am I appealing to the heart? And where are the conflicts? Where are the challenges? What's the drama? And going through that process will help you to just either sanity check a story that you've already written that's just fallen out of you like water from a jug, or it's been something that you've labored over and you kind of analyzed, which is probably what our fabulous panelists are doing at the moment, I hope, with their stories. So the next section that I want to talk to you about is the method. So I'm using that term loosely because it sort of plays into this idea of, the recipe of storytelling and this cooking analogy that I'm using. But it is really a structure. At the end of the day, there is a simple and well-trodden story arc structure that we can use. And there's some really great examples. And I mentioned one earlier, the reluctant hero's journey. And there's also the hero's journey, which has these kind of common elements. And you'll find that there's a lot of stories that follow that, even when you might not realize it. And, if you think about any film and then you go, oh, I wonder if that's a hero's journey or a reluctant hero's journey. And you go, oh, actually, yeah, Alice in Wonderland, that, oh, yeah, that is that. Any great book, oh, yeah, that actually is that. The Book Thief, oh, yeah, who is the protagonist? Yeah, they're going on that journey. Yes. So most things, not all things, of course, but a lot of things, a lot of popular things in storytelling follow those frameworks. But something that's even more common and is permeated through books and plays and films, and to a degree TV series, not as much, but is the 3-act structure. So if you go to film school and you go through the process of learning about film theory, this is one of the things that you'll spend a semester or more on. So the structure itself is not that complicated. It's based on the idea of breaking your story into 3 parts. Now they're not equally proportionate parts, but kind of for the purposes of simplicity, there are 3 simple stages. Now, Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And as the 3-act structure, we detail, the first act is about setup. So this is where you set up your story. So when we want to introduce someone to our story, we want them to understand a couple of things. We want to understand, where is this story taking place? What's the universe of this story? And one of my favorite examples of that, because it's so complicated, is Star Wars. So Star Wars, when it was originally screened to a group of friends, George Lucas was asking some of his filmmaker buddies to watch it. They loved it. But Steven Spielberg, another brilliant filmmaker, suggested you should have like a scrolling thing at the start that explains what this whole thing's about, because nobody knows what this universe is. Nobody knows what these Jedi things are, and it doesn't make sense. But as soon as you watch Star Wars, whether you've seen it or not, if you actually read that first scrolling, you're introduced to the universe. And that's an extreme example because it's so much complexity in what's going on in that universe. But in other films and other stories, very quickly you work out, is this taking place in the past? Is this taking place in reality? Or is this taking place in a distant future? Or is it taking place in some kind of sci-fi, or fantastic situation where there is magic and wizardry? That setup section helps set that context. So then for the audience, if they are wondering how a particular person, character is going through a situation, and then all of a sudden they just fly their way out of it, but they don't realize that, flying is a thing within the story, it becomes very jarring, and it's not good to have stories like that. You want to ideally make it so your audience has a palpable sense of where the story is taking place, and that setup helps. It is also where we introduce those characters. So whether it's the key protagonists or antagonists and side characters, it could be love interest characters, and in the context of work, it can be our users, or it can be our stakeholders, or it can be our competition. We want to talk a little bit about those things fairly early on. Now, there's a critical thing that happens in the setup stage, in the first act, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's called the inciting incident. So some of you may have heard that term before, and it's sometimes also referred to as the call to adventure or the call to arms. And for those of you who work in design, you might know the term call to action, the CTA. So it's actually, we're talking about a very similar thing, just applied in a slightly different format. Now, the second act, confrontation. Now, this is where the majority of that drama and that conflict can unfold. So we can introduce a lot of obstacles and challenges. This is where the orcs pile up against the hobbits. This is where the good guys go bad, and you have a traitor in your midst. This is where the love of your life's letter gets lost in the mail, and you believe that they're dead. These are the things that make the story engaging. And this act is actually, in most situations, longer than the first and the last act. So it's disproportionately represented on the timeline here, but it is actually larger in terms of duration. Then the third act, resolution. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the term "they lived happily ever after." So the resolution is where we sort of tie everything in a bow. We bring everything to a close. We wrap up the story. But before we do that, before we actually close things out and we either have a twist at the end or some kind of conclusion and resolution to the story's arc, sometimes we have this other thing, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide, which is called the climax. So this is a really interesting thing to think about when you're writing stories. What's your climax for the story? Where is everything brought to a head? What's the big boss fight, or the big performance that the characters have to play? What is that sort of critical moment which will define them, help them reach their goals, help them achieve what it is that they're trying to achieve? So think about that. So I'm going to show you just on the next illustration here. There's a couple of asterisks there, and what they're there to do is sort of signify opportunities where you can introduce different parts of the story. So in the setup, you'll see there's 2 points now. The first one there could be what I was referring to earlier, which is the inciting incident. So the inciting incident is that call to arms. Now, if we take the example of Frodo, back in the Shire, just hanging out, having a good time with his mates, all of a sudden Gandalf comes and, there's this new mission is thrust upon him. So there's an inciting incident. There's a call to adventure now, where Frodo's being asked to go on this journey and to destroy this ring. And I'm sure there's lots of other examples that you can think of there as well. The next point above it, now those asterisks, they actually refer to plot points or obstacles. So they're where we can introduce moments of drama. So there's 4 there. You might have 2, you might have 10, you might have 1. It's just there to exemplify that. You want to inject different moments throughout the story. Like, you want to have your story having a little bit of a wave where your audience is kind of going through highs and lows, and where we think we're about to achieve success, and then all of a sudden we didn't realize that we ran out of batteries and now we have to go through another hurdle. Whatever it is, those are the things that again keep the audience engaged, because you're making the story more interesting. If you just have one hurdle and we overcome it, okay, that might be fine in a short story. But when you're talking about a fairly long story like a book or a feature film or a saga, then this becomes important to have lots of different obstacles, lots of challenges. Some are small, some are big, some are emotional, some are physical, some are intrinsic, some are extrinsic and external. And then the third act, you'll notice that the blue asterisk, that there is our climax opportunity. And again, it's not necessarily in the right place 100%. Think of this as that guidebook where you can, take this as a starting point, and then you can evolve it, you can build on it. And it's good to know the rules before you start breaking them, is what I always say. So I want to talk a little bit about using the acts now. So imagine you've got this structure and go, okay, great. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah, I know that. Everybody knows that. That's, every old storyteller is aware of that. That's fine. Using the acts is the key here. So I talked a little bit about it on the previous slide, but this is where you're able to actually go, oh, well, how do I apply this to my presentation? How do I apply this to a public speaking engagement that I have? And using the acts is really the method that I was talking about earlier. So Act 1, it's where you develop those characters, you establish the universe, and you get your audience invested in the story. In Act 2, it's presenting those challenges, the obstacles, and creating conflict, the drama we mentioned. And this is where you can deliver the meat of your story. So it's that larger piece. And Act 3, the resolution or the solutions, where we're bringing everything to a close. It could be the happily ever after or the tragic ending, up to you. So there's opportunities there as well. So this is a practical example. Now imagine that these little diamonds here are actually Post-it notes. So this is something that I use quite a lot. So those of you who've worked with me on big client presentations or pitches, things like that, you might have done this with me. And one of the things that I like to do is structure out the narrative of what we're going to present or what story we're going to tell. And it's quite simply just on a whiteboard somewhere on a big piece of paper or a Miro board, we'll write Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and beginning, middle, end, setup, confrontation, resolution, however, depending on the context. But then I use Post-its, and these can be digital Post-its in Miro, or they can be physical. I like physical ones. Post-its in a Sharpie or a pencil, and you just start writing out these kind of key ingredients. And the benefit of doing this is what you can do is you can start plotting them along the timeline, but it also gives you an ability to then quickly edit your story. So if you have a general sense of the story that you want to tell rattling around in your head, and you just go straight into writing the story. Now that's fine, and absolutely that's a thing that's been done for many years, and you can definitely do that. But as you go through the process, you might find that you're getting to a point where you're so immersed in it, you can't sort of take a step back and see how the structure hangs together and how the story flows. So the flow is really one of the things that's very challenging as a writer, as a storyteller. And this is an opportunity for you to time out different components of the story and your different scenes, you could say. And you can also move them around. So if you think about someone like Quentin Tarantino, a lot of his films, not all, but a lot are in non-linear narratives. So, they don't actually follow a normal sort of chronological flow. And you can achieve that type of effect here, before you even started writing dialogue or, writing scene descriptions or, writing the details of the story. And there's some examples there, like I just put a lot of things blow up a few times, but there's, just ideas that you can just Post-it note out. And, you might find that some of them just get scrunched up and thrown away. Others get promoted and become, more central to the protagonist and more central to the story arc. And your, iterative approach to how you tell a story starts with this process. So understanding the acts, thinking about the ingredients, and then starting to iterate the story in this way is, I think, a really, really great way to do it. And one of the things that I'd like to mention here is in the class that I teach, at least half of the class have never told a story before, or they think they've never told a story before in the sense of traditional storytelling sense. The other half have maybe attempted it. Some of them maybe have written scripts, screenplays, they're really interested in it. But the majority of people are either not interested, not experienced, or don't think that they're a writer or a storyteller. By the end of this process, they all realize that they can write. And they may not feel like they're good at it. They may not feel like they're going to be the next, award-winning author or anything like that. But they understand that we've demystified some of the process of writing, of creative writing at least, and storytelling. So this is, what ask you. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, this is really interesting, I'm hoping you're watching this and you're interested in this because storytelling is appealing to you in some way and you're wanting to kind of learn a little bit about the process. But this is the thing that I would leave you with is break it down into simple components. You've got some ingredients, you've got a method and a structure, and just kind of be a little bit creative. Just encourage yourself to get creative and then go through the process. And you'll be surprised. Hopefully, you might write something really brilliant. It could just be an improvement to the way you write your journal, or it might be the next Saw, which was written in Australia and actually was quite successful for the filmmakers. So this is the simplified version. And the reason why I show this is because this just tweaks it a little bit. So a lot of what I've shown so far, I've used examples of telling stories in a film context or potentially in a book context. But this is now translating it back to maybe what you're doing at work. So Act 1, this is really defining the problem. So similar to how we have Act 1 in the normal story arc, we unpack the problem in details and we're setting the scene if this is what's at stake. So we could potentially have a call to adventure, but that might get a little bit too abstract when you're trying to think about daily life. So defining the problem is a nice simplified way of doing that. Act 2, conflict makes it relevant. So who does this affect and why is it relevant to your audience? So what I mean by that is think about who your audience is when you're presenting something. So if you're presenting to your boss, what does your problem that you've defined have to do with them? And how does it affect them? How is it relevant to what they're doing or what they're trying to achieve and their goals? That's a really great way to hook your audience in and garner engagement. And it's a really great way to kind of rally support as well. And I'll get to that in a moment. And then pitching the solution. So the last part of your presentation should be, okay, we know what the problem is, we know who it affects, but here's how we're going to solve it. And so what's the solution? What do you plan to do about it? And remember to keep it simple here. Like we don't want to go into really complex detail. And depending on what the context of the presentation is, you might need detail. And obviously you'll know when and when not to do very, very detailed explanations. But that's the really high level simplified version of how you can use that sort of 3-act structure in a more realistic daily presentation format. So I just want to talk a little bit about why storytelling. And, there's some advantages in storytelling that, I mentioned at the top of the session. It's a great way of passing on information. And importantly, when we part with information in this way, we actually allow our audience to internalize it in a much better way. So if you share, documents or you kind of present in looser ways or less structured ways, sometimes it's hard for people to follow, but also if they can't follow it, then they're perhaps less likely to remember it as well. So there's a feeling of emotional connection as well that we want to trigger in people. That's a real win. If you can do that, then that's how you can really get people to believe in what you're saying and to really feel that what you're talking about actually is important to them and they can then make it important. And it can serve as a very persuasive communication tool, and great orateurs and great storytellers tend to be great leaders as well. They tend to be people that can, command armies or win elections. Very topical at the moment. And it transforms abstract things into something more concrete. So if you think about some of the really bizarre concepts that we're aware of in modern society, whether it's science fiction or whether it's very fantastic, the Harry Potter style wizardry stuff, I'm sure a lot of people kind of know a lot about those universes and about those worlds. I can see Mia smiling because I know she loves those books. There's a great deal of complex information there that's really abstract and got nothing to do with daily life. But we understand that because it's been shared with us in a really enjoyable way to digest. And it really drives engagement. So we want to make sure that people are understanding the key things we want to say and they're engaged with our message. Storytelling and approaching what you're trying to share in terms of information from a storytelling perspective can definitely play a big role in helping with that. So I'm just going to quickly go through. I might just time check with Mia. How are we doing for time, Mia? All good. So I'm going to go through the applications now for the different roles and some of the different roles that we have in sort of modern workplaces and particularly in our business. And these are just examples. They're not necessarily exhaustive. And, I think that you can apply some of this storytelling practice into a lot of what you do daily, whether consciously or as you build up capability unconsciously. But some examples here, user profiles. And so things like personas, or where you're talking about a group of people or a particular person. Designers use these things quite a lot, and approaching it from a storytelling lens and interpreting information in that way can be very helpful. A journey map or a user story, a user journey, are effectively a narrative arc, like that you're following someone through a story of a moment in time or as they try to complete a job. So you're already kind of using it in an illustrative and a visual way. So if you think about it in a narrative way, you might find that you're able to add detail or make it more engaging. Maybe there's a way to add emotional resonance, as you highlight pain points, those kinds of things. User needs, and kind of telling the story of a person and what their needs are. Pain points is a great one. So exemplifying pain points and making them something that your audience is really easy to connect to, but also that they have that empathy. And I think a lot of the artifacts that show these are designed around that idea of empathy. And this is just kind of, can we elevate it a little bit more and include more of that narrative feel, that storytelling approach to help them really, really hit home and really resonate. And then user expectations, another one where we're kind of helping ensure that the voice of the user is communicated in the storytelling format is really good for that as well. For researchers, often one of the biggest challenges we find is we've got so much data and so much complex information. How do we distill it into something that's really, really easy for our audience? And our audience might be like executives or key stakeholders, key decision makers. How do we distill it into something that they can just quickly understand and take action on? And so translating complex data, one of the best ways is, I like to say, there's a combination of stats and stories. And it's something I picked up from someone I've worked with over the years. And that's where you do have that statistical information and the things that you're talking about. So that could be like quantitative insights and those kinds of things. But you're also able to then align it to stories. And this could be qualitative insights. So telling the story about a particular user. So 99% of people have this problem. And here's some quotes that we've obtained from some of those people. And they then tell the story of, oh, well, so I had this problem the other day. I was on the bus and I tried to open my app to perform this task and it crashed on me. And so what you've done is you've given a magnitude of the problem with the statistical information, but then you've also made it really personal and helped it to be relatable for the audience and help it to maybe potentially emotionally resonate with them. And that's, again, relying on that natural empathy we want to have. Some of the other examples there, so communication design. So when you've got lots of information, you're trying to create complex information architecture structures, thinking about the narrative structure as well can sometimes be useful. It's not a direct correlation. You obviously don't map the 3-act structure against your IA map, but if you think about how we consume information, those acts have been with us for a long time. So if you think about learnability and our familiarity with information consumption, we are used to consuming information in a way that's very similar to that. So can you design communications around that? Can you make things more useful and more usable and more engaging by thinking about that? And when you're reporting as a researcher, this is just things to think about. They're kind of like brain, little brain teaser type things. So for engineers, I'm not an engineer and I come from an engineering background, so I had to kind of talk to a few people and sort of consult here. But engineers to me are sometimes the group of people who think that they are the least qualified to be storytellers. And they probably feel like they do it the least in their daily practices. And so this is more a challenge, I guess, for engineers than anything. So if there are engineers that are watching this, so if you're following along, I want you to think about all the times you share information, and are there opportunities for you to inject some storytelling components to the way you're sharing that information? Having worked with a lot of engineers over the years, I've found that there is a tendency to lean towards shorthand, which is not necessarily bad. It definitely promotes efficiency, but there is also a tendency. Now, fortunately, engineers tend to be very accurate, which is great, and so there's not a lot of this and that. It's quite specific, so that tends to be helpful. But there's a tendency to be kind of lackluster in the emotional connection, the user connection, the people connection. So think about when you're talking about data transformation and you're trying to introduce concepts to people, or when you're trying to talk about emerging technologies, can you talk about the people that this technology affects? how its purpose, and then how it affects them and they're trying to achieve their purpose? Can you build a simple explanation that also connects to people emotionally? These are the things that will help. And of course, inject some drama. that can always be fun. And the last one that I wanted to talk about was just for leaders. And this is the easiest one because I think that there's a really strong correlation between natural leaders, good leaders, and storytelling. And I learned to, a long time ago from one of my favorite leaders, one of my favorite bosses, that one of my biggest weaknesses was not bringing people on the journey. So I was, I would approach things with, a foregone solution in my head, and it may be the right solution, but I thought about it really fast, and whether it was early in the morning or late at night, depending on how productive I was on that particular day. But I would approach the problem, go through a very quick exercise internally, and then I would go, this is what we're going to do, everyone. Now, one of the lessons that I learned from that boss and that leader was that if you don't bring people on the journey, sometimes it's very hard for them to get on board with what you're doing. So I felt that was a really great lesson, and I'm summarizing it quite quickly for you here. But what I learned was telling the story, the whole story, can sometimes be a great way of bringing the people that you're working with on the journey with you. So it can also be a great way of working out that where you thought you were heading isn't actually where you need to go. And it's an inclusive way of leading people. And I think that these are simple steps, and you will see that I am repeating a lot of what I shared with you today. But if you think about, what are the problems that we're here to solve? And, whether these are big problems, they're emotional problems, they're practical problems. If we really have conversations and people understand what's at stake, then these are great ways to rally people. If you think about the conflict and the drama, and how do you make that relevant to the audience, that's important. And we got timed out, I think. Sorry, everyone. I'll just stop my screen share for a moment. Mia, I think you're on mute.
So while we deal with some technical issues, which is peak 2020, we'll hear very briefly from our panelists, and we do apologize, we may run over just for a few minutes. We'll go alphabetically. So Antares, would you like to tell us a little bit more about your story and which mystery box you have chosen?
Okay, actually, I've chosen the first mystery box, a baby genius, and his purpose is to become famous. And suddenly there's the drama, there's a meteor coming. So maybe I should start, yeah. I'll make this quick as possible. So once upon a time, there is a farm in the countryside that lived a new married couple that just had a baby. They were surprised when at first few hours, the baby just said, "Mother." The mother surprised all, and of course the fathers also. But apparently the little baby was an adult before, just plain 40 years old, single genius scientist at NASA. And because of his past, he was determined to do something meaningful and want to be famous, not as an unnamed scientist, just like his previous past. Sadly, there was nothing he could do, especially in the countryside. But that when it's happened, 1 year later, suddenly, the countryside was crowded. The news and the peoples were shouting, "It seems that a meteor is coming," and directly at the countryside. So that's when he got the idea, I could get famous with this. The baby actually has a solution for this in his past life, creating a portal generated device that will teleport the meteor directly to another place in space. When the military suddenly groups in all the civilians in the refugees camp, the scientists all have configuring the solution for stopping the meteor. Of course, the baby couldn't do anything. He barely could walk. He tried and tried with his current body that he must find a way to help the scientist. So he managed to have some paper and a pen, and he wants to share it to the scientist, but no one will believe a baby. When he realized that, his heart was broken, and he was moping around in the camp with the blueprints of the device scattered beside him. Suddenly, a scientist approached him, a head scientist no less. She was a genius as the head of the team. They already set up similar devices to solve their problem. She was intrigued by the facts that a baby created blueprints, similar ones no less, that she was developing. And turns out the blueprints has the exact solution to have in their device. The calculation, the concept have the same way of thinking as the head scientist. After analyzing it, the scientists are getting to work. A few days later, the device was complete. And when it turned on, the meteor came, and suddenly it's teleport the meteor outside the space, and the Earth is safe. So because the one who was proposing that solution was a baby, he suddenly became famous as the savior of the world. The end.
That was fantastic, Antares. Sean, do you have anything you'd like to say about that?
That's great. I really like that. You made me laugh a lot and had a nice, yeah, you did a really good job of taking that silly concept and turning it into something quite well done.
Thank you.
I'd like to know more about this teleporting machine, to be perfectly honest. Farid, would you like to tell us your story?
Hello, everyone. So I'm taking the mysterious box 2 about the mouse. Okay, so a long time ago, at the year of 2002, there is one small mouse named Fluffy. He can talk, and he also a genius. And he lives in a lab called Aleph. Okay, so this small guy, is a small creature with a big dream, a very big dream. He wants to be a president, but not for the mouse, but for the world. But the problem is, he is small, and human don't like mouse. One day, COVID-19, what we call, attack the people, and then this small creature found a way on how to solve, how to cure the COVID-19. So he talked with the scientists that he lived with at the labs and talked about the cure of this what we call this disease. So after that, after they found the cure and the president of the United States asked him to meet the mouse, and then I think that's all. I have no idea.
Thanks, Farid. That was great. That was really good. Sean?
Yeah, that was also really, really fun. I like the mouse, just the way you delivered that. So the mouse has big dreams. That got me. But it also, yeah, I just thought it was really funny to think that, in present times, it's quite plausible that we could be looking to a mouse, a talking mouse, as a potential leader. They can get us out of this COVID situation. But well done.
Thank you.
I think we'd take anything if it can get us out of this situation, isn't that right? Next up, we have Kristian.
Hey, and actually, it's a surprise that I took the third one because we've got the sequence. So I wrote a little bit about the mutant ninja turtle that got affected by, in my case, I think was it there something with the climate change, and he wants to find love. It's called Killing Love. Raphael only knew her name, Jenny, and it was the most beautiful girl he's ever met. They met online 5 weeks ago, and this morning he finally decided to ask her out. He hid his giant sword in an empty pizza box, wore his best socks and a red cap, put some father's cologne, and headed to the Eastern Station to get out and text her. "Good boy," said Master Splinter when Raph stopped eating 5 weeks ago. "Never be shy. Waiting is what's killing love." "Ha, rough as a wuss," laughed Leo, the older one. Raph hid his anger, but the only thing he texted Jenny that morning was, "Hey, how are you today?" And he was afraid of looking at his phone again. But tonight, he was sure that what he was supposed to do. He took east for the station to find a Wi-Fi there and drop her a little message. "Hey, let's go out for a coffee." He imagined himself and Jenny's little angel sitting in the coffee shop and laughing at an old anecdote. He knew he waited so long and he couldn't wait more. He imagined the rain, the night city lights, and their first passionate kiss. And suddenly the flood rushed into the tunnel, and the first thing Raph knew, he was drowning in the cold, dirty water. Something heavy hit him in his head, and the last thing he saw before the sight went dark was his little phone, its fading screen, and a new incoming message from some Jenny. A month passed. Raphael left the sewage for the first time after the rain finally stopped. All this time, he tried to recover his phone, tried to find Jenny, tried to reach her and say how sorry he was, how much he missed her, but the best he could do was wait. He went to the station and sat there for hours, hoping he could find her in the crowd, but he never did. He walked the flooded streets, looking into strangers' eyes. He asked around, hoping he could find her, but he never did. Rumors have it you can still find an old, lonely turtle walking down the street in a wet overcoat, mumbling about the love he missed, the time that has passed, and something he wished he could find, but never did. Yeah, that was it.
That was fantastic.
It's a bit dark.
It was very dark. It took that twist was great. But yeah, really, really nice. I like that the obstacle for you was, the initial obstacle was his fear of, he had to overcome his fear of texting her in the first place. And so climate change was more of a backdrop of maybe the flooding and that. So yeah, well done. Really, really nicely done. Great delivery as well.
Next up, we have Laetitia.
Oh my God. Yeah, so I've written this. I haven't reread it, so yeah. Anyway, let's go for it. Once upon a time, in a childcare center right around the corner from where you live, there was a little baby boy called Steve-O. Steve-O was just 6 months old, and he loved going to meet his baby mates every day. They would stay at a socially responsible distance from each other, chewing their toes, laughing at the ceiling, or crying when they needed attention. Steve-O thought life was good. He would eat, sleep, get changed on demand. He didn't have to talk to anyone. He just needed to be there, and all the adults would come and fuss over him. But one day, Steve-O made a frightening discovery. He realized he was bored. He realized that he wasn't doing anything useful ever. He became an antisocial baby and spent most of his days thinking about the purpose of his life. Finally, it came to him. He started listening to the gurgling sounds his baby friends made, and suddenly he could understand them. They were saying things like, "I want to hear that story with the apple and the wolf again," or "I want more of that pear and broccoli puree." But nobody understood them. And that's when they started to cry, because they were misunderstood. Life was no picnic for these babies in the daycare center. Steve-O thought, well, obviously, I must be special because I can understand them. I have been blessed with some special power, and it is my duty to my fellow baby mates to make the world aware of their plight. These poor babies can actually communicate. They can think, but adults have forgotten how to speak baby language. So Steve-O, now 9 months old, worked very hard night and day on his fine motor skills. He wanted to find a way to send a message to all the adults of the world that they needed to pay more attention to the babies. He started drawing with his crayons. He drew a school with a baby as a teacher and parents as the students. By the time he was a year old, he was able to log into his mom's iPhone, and he started sharing his drawings on Instagram. He figured out how to hack some famous influencer's account, and suddenly he had millions of followers. Everyone started talking about him and his drawings. Debates were held on Zoom to interpret Steve-O's drawings. Everyone was baffled. They didn't understand the meaning behind his pictures. typical grown-up, overthinking everything. Until one day, Anna, a daycare educator with a heart of gold, saw the drawings and realized that Steve was trying to tell the world. She sat with her little babies, she was a daycare educator, and started really listening to them. Suddenly she got it. She understood them. Annabelle wanted to play with a purple dinosaur, not the pink dragon. Alex wanted to dress up as a fireman. Anna was so happy. She messaged Steve and told him she understood him. Steve was so relieved. But there was some dramatic news coming up from NASA. They had detected a meteor heading straight to Earth. It was going to crash and send us all back to another ice age. Steve had an idea. He talked to the babies in his daycare center and posted a message on Instagram. By then, everyone on Earth had heard of Steve, and they paid attention to his message. When the meteor was about to enter the atmosphere, all the babies of the world started crying together. The loud sounds and the vibrations of their cries caused the meteor to be diverted off its path of destruction. The Earth was saved, thanks to babies crying. After that, every new parent was given mandatory baby language lessons to help them better understand their babies, and everyone lived and slept happily ever after. That was it. A bit full on.
Thanks, Laetitia. That was great.
Thank you. That was awesome. That's so well done. I really like that.
And last but not least, we have, oh no, not last but not least. Sorry, next up we have Murray.
Oh, cool. Yeah, sure. I'll pick the mystery box too, the talking mouse. Okay, once upon a time, there was a tiny mouse called Muffin, living in an old uni library with a group of mice. Muffin was way smarter than his friends. They were always chewing books. Unlike his friends, Muffin was interested in reading books before chewing them. And as a result, he was a very knowledgeable mouse. Until one night, Muffin found a mysterious book in the back shelf that weirdly shining out green lights. He never remembered what happens that night. But next morning, he realizes he can speak. So long story short, he got very famous among people, and everyone was so surprised by his knowledge and skills that everyone decided to nominate Muffin for the next presidency. It was a dream comes true for Muffin until COVID-19 hit and Muffin got the virus, unfortunately. He's getting better now, and he's hoping to get himself ready for the next presidency. And he's pretty sure he will be the next president. That's it.
Thanks, Murray. That was great.
That was a cute one.
Yeah.
Cute Muffin. Steve and Muffin, the geniuses. Very cute geniuses. Well done.
And last but not least, we have Panduka.
Yeah, it's my turn. So I picked up different elements from these three boxes. So this is how story goes. Once upon a time, there was a mouse who was all alone and looking for love. This mice could talk very well. One night, the mouse came out of his tunnel and started walking around the streets, and he could hear a crying baby. He started running here and there and looked for the baby, and he found the baby. Then he decided to take care of this baby. As the time goes on, mouse raised this baby, taught him, fed him, and the baby became a young boy. Unfortunately, COVID-19 hit the world very hard, and the mouse died because he was too old. The death of his guardian was an emotional situation for this young man. And he decided to come out of his tunnel and help the people who are in need. He started doing social work, help the people around the world. Once he decided to do more, and he felt like he could do more if he had enough power. So he thought of becoming the president one day. He started learning, educating himself. And when the right time comes, he ran for the presidency and he was elected by the people. And after that, he started to work to make the world a better place. That's my story.
Nicely done.
Thanks, Panduka.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for Q&A today, but what we would be doing is presenting the questions that we do have to Sean, and those answers will be in his Medium article, which should be out fairly shortly. So do keep an eye out for that. And if you would like to speak at the next Academy, or if you have any ideas for topics, do reach out to the Academy team via academy@aleph-labs.com.
Thank you. Thanks, Mia. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining today. I think we will be ending it today. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye, team.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.